Jane fell for a charismatic guru who claimed he could heal his followers.
There was nothing that threatening when you first met them. They just looked like a group of friends.
Today, Mohan Singh is serving a long sentence for sex crimes, and Jane wonders how she fell for his patter. Barbara Weed's teenage son walked out on his family, influenced, she believed, by an online group and its controversial founder.
He convinces people quite quickly that they have been a victim of abuse, that their parents never loved them, they were always mistreated.
And when Lizzie Davis joined a spiritual retreat, she was persuaded to hand over more than £600,000.
No person in their right mind is actually going to do what I did. I wasn't in my right mind.
To some critics, groups like these are really cults. But
one person's cult is somebody else's new religious movement.
So how can you tell whether you're at risk?
There's no such thing as a free lunch. So if everyone is loving you and they've never even met you before, that could be a warning sign.
And how hard is it to get out?
You have no money, you have no friends, you have to remake your relationship with your family, and it becomes almost impossible, sometimes for years, for people to break away from that situation.
We hear the frightening stories of people whose lives have been turned upside down and who believe they or their loved ones have been trapped in a cult.
Listening to somebody do that to my son.
Barbara Weed last saw her youngest son, Tom, when he was 18. Overnight, he cut all ties with his entire family. Tom had become involved in an online discussion group called Free Domain Radio, hosted by its charismatic founder, Stefan Molyneux.
Sadly, I've never known Tom as an adult, because I haven't seen him for 6 years.
Tom upped and left with no warning just before he was about to sit his A-levels.
I came home from work that night and found a note that he'd put through the door. I actually kept it. The note torn out of a school exercise book and written in his blue cartridge pen, because he always had to have blue ink cartridges. The note said, "Dear family, I need to take an indefinite amount of time out from the family, so I've moved in with a friend. Please do not contact me. Tom." His father came home from work and I said, "Tom's gone," and he didn't believe me. And I showed him the note and he still didn't believe me, and went off to check his room. And sure enough, all the boxes were gone, his things were gone, his keys were on his desk. His computer was gone. He'd taken that with him.
Tom's dad was equally shocked by his disappearance.
There was no warning, so I remember very little about kind of what that was all about, except it was just a day like any other day, except that that happened.
Barbara discovered that Tom was still attending school, but she made the tough decision not to contact her son to give him space. Instead, she began going over and over his recent behaviour.
He seemed more distant, distracted, detached. He wasn't even coming down for meals anymore. He wanted to cook his own food. He was vegetarian, then he was vegan. I just assumed that he was just going through the normal grumpy teenager phase as far as I knew.
Like many normal teenagers, Tom also spent hours online.
He had homework to do. He had a computer in his room to help with his homework, and he used that for his social life.
But much of Tom's time was also being spent on the website of Free Domain Radio, an online philosophical group founded by a charismatic Canadian, Stefan Molyneux. Molyneux has a provocative and confrontational style.
If you support me getting shot, at least have the courage, the balls, to look me in the eye and say, "Steph, I support you getting shot. And then I can get you the fuck out of my life."
The online Free Domain Radio group claims to be the largest and most popular group of its kind, with over 100 million downloads. On his personal YouTube channel, Stefan Molyneux has over 235,000 subscribers. Subjects discussed include everything from homosexuality and abortion to why democracy fails and whether feminists are evil. While Tom had been safely upstairs at home, Barbara hadn't given much thought to Free Domain Radio.
I could hear Molyneux's voice coming from Tom's room. I couldn't hear what was being said. It was through a bedroom door. And I thought it was part of his homework. What I didn't realise was that he was wading through over 1,000 podcasts by Molyneux.
Once Tom had abandoned his family, Free Domain Radio took on greater significance to Barbara, and she decided to take a closer look at it.
I thought of the voice coming through his wall, and I looked at the website. I saw that other people were being very critical of their family.
She was on the internet day and night trying to find out about Molyneux, so of course I kind of did the same thing.
I needed to know what Tom had been involved in to try and understand what was going on in his mind, what he was feeling, what he was saying.
As Barbara waded through Free Domain Radio's forums and podcasts, she made a heartbreaking discovery. She came across the actual voice of her own son, clearly in an emotional state.
I don't know why, but I'm just crying now.
There's nothing wrong with that. This is a good and healthy thing.
Such complete sadness.
When Barbara Weed's 18-year-old son Tom suddenly walked out on the family, she was shocked to discover that he'd been talking directly to Stefan Molyneux, the charismatic founder of an online group called Free Domain Radio. Barbara felt Molyneux's controversial views had strongly influenced Tom.
The complicity of mothers is the core of child abuse. Mothers create them.
God, that is just sick beyond words.
Even now, it's really shocking to listen to the podcast and hear my son talking and asking quite innocent, reasonable questions. Why do I feel so upset when I see animals being mistreated? And then within a couple of sentences, Molyneux was convincing him that not just he had seen animals being mistreated because his cats were yelled at, but he was treated like an animal. He was a victim of abuse.
I think that you, when you were a child, were treated like an animal by somebody who was cruel to animals. I think that the compassion you have towards animals, which I respect and I think is a good thing to have, but I think that it's a stand-in for something that's harder for you to face, which is how you were treated.
Times journalist Tom Whipple investigated the story just after Tom disappeared and was also struck by Molyneux's conversations with Tom.
It felt a little bit like listening to a fortune teller kind of priming people. And after phoning in veganism meant he had a problem with people who eat meat, it was suddenly on to the fact that his dad had kicked a cat once, which both psychologically explained that whole thing with veganism and also might mean that he needs to leave his family.
As Barbara had researched Free Domain Radio more, she had discovered that one topic of discussion for the group was the cutting of ties with family, or defooing.
According to Molyneux, the relationship with the parent and the child is abusive. The child doesn't have any choice because of the unequal power relationship between the parent and the child.
This is why I say to people, if your parents are evil, ditch them.
Professor Rod Dubrow-Marshall sees Free Domain Radio's defooing as a potentially harmful influence.
FDR indoctrinate people into thinking that they have to defoo, have to cut themselves off from their family, because if they don't, they are never going to be psychologically well or healthy. It makes them actually psychologically unhealthy because they're not able to grow and develop. They're not able to talk to their parents about their experiences. They actually become instead totally dominated by the guru and the leader in a very unhealthy way.
Molyneux said in a newspaper interview in 2008 that it's rare for people to actually defoo, although he and his wife have both done it. And he admits he doesn't believe there are any good parents out there. When Tom was chatting online with Molyneux, his father, John, became the focus of attention. Tom told Molyneux his parents used to kick the family cat.
I've got so many memories of my parents just screaming at my cats and kicking them. And I mean, I wouldn't say they're particularly more abusive towards animals than I'd say most people are.
Then Tom went on to accuse his father of anger issues, although he was clear he was never violent towards Tom himself.
When he'd get really mad, he'd just yell and he'd throw things around the room. He could trash a room in like 15 seconds almost.
What you went through is a really staggeringly evil and terrifying situation. Right? That this guy's psychotic rage laid waste to significant aspects of your childhood and of your soul, right?
Tom was sobbing, and he believed that he had been mistreated as a child.
Something that went on and on throughout our childhood, and I would imagine continues to this day.
You're right. Whenever he walks in the room, I just feel the same feeling. It just comes right back to me.
Tom's father, John, has never been able to bring himself to listen to the podcast, but he categorically denies ever kicking the cat, having anger issues, or trashing a room.
It horrified me to think that I could be thought of in that way. Yeah, I'm moody occasionally, but not violent, not those things.
Listening to somebody do that to my son, it would be like watching somebody kicking and beating him on a newsreel. Why would anybody do that to my son? Sorry.
Why would Tom make such accusations? His dad thinks it may have been because his marriage to Tom's mum was failing.
Barbara and I had rows, yes, and they were rows for reasons. And I tried anything to get through all the worst things, which is shouting and whatever. So if Tom picked up on that, he picked up on that.
Barbara is in no doubt that Stefan Molyneux was the reason Tom left.
He convinces people quite quickly that they have been a victim of abuse, that their parents never loved them, they were always mistreated.
Tom still wouldn't talk to his mum, but 6 months after leaving, he did agree to talk with Times journalist Tom Whipple.
The obvious interview was to speak to Tom, who agreed to speak to me on condition that also Stefan Molyneux, who runs the website Free Domain Radio, was part of the interview as well. And in 2 hours of interviews, I still didn't understand it with him. There wasn't the abuse that I would expect to just, on apparently a whim, give up on a 20-year relationship with the person who knows you the best. And frankly, although he'd be uncomfortable with someone saying this and was uncomfortable, I said it quite clearly loves him the most.
It was clear to Tom Whipple that Free Domain Radio and Stefan Molyneux played a big part in Tom's life, although Tom went to great lengths to say he hadn't been unduly influenced.
The only time Tom seemed angry to me was at the idea that he was being manipulated. It felt odd that he insisted that when I interviewed him, it was only with the presence of Stefan. I think the most significant relationship in Tom's life, at least when I spoke to him, certainly was FDR. It was certainly Free Domain Radio.
Barbara Weed was faced with never seeing her 18-year-old son Tom again after he had got involved with the online group Free Domain Radio and its founder Stefan Molyneux.
This is why I say to people, if your parents are evil, ditch them.
Tom had followed Stefan's advice and in the summer of 2008 cut all ties with his family.
He left home in the middle of his A-levels
He cut himself off from his family. That's not because his family wouldn't want to give him support.
Barbara was determined not to give up on her son. When after a few weeks she found out Tom was working in a cafe, she made plans to go and see him.
I knew that if I went up to him and asked for a cup of tea, he would have to serve me because I was a customer and he couldn't refuse. And sure enough, that's what happened. So I've worked out that I would have, 20 seconds, maybe a minute, to speak to him, to say what I wanted to say while he was making the tea and taking the money from me. And then after that, he'd be able to, he'd have finished serving me, he could walk away. His job was done.
Barbara's plan started well. She managed to speak to Tom, but she was left distraught by their brief interaction.
I did also say that he could come back any time, even in 20 years, and he'd be very welcome. And he just shook his head. He didn't speak. He just shook his head and looked at me as if to say, "Fool." That's the last time I spoke to him.
Barbara's story is sadly very typical of the experience of parents who have lost their loved ones to cults, where they suddenly get a letter saying, "I'm disappearing, I don't want to talk to you anymore." And it's the way in which cults break up families, the way in which cults harm people psychologically by expecting their members to split themselves from their families in that way.
We approached Free Domain Radio for a response to the allegations made in this programme. Stefan Molyneux did not respond, but he has previously denied that Free Domain Radio is a cult. Speaking to a newspaper about Tom's story, he said, "It's the furthest thing from a cult." 6 years on, Barbara knows little about what her youngest son is doing, other than that he might be living in Brighton.
I'm not going to look for him today. I wouldn't know where to find him anyway. But, the chances of ever seeing him again are so minimal. And there'd be no point because he hates me. He will always hate me because that's what Molyneux has trained him to do. He won't want to see me.
Tom's parents were, and I think are, distraught. It's left them trying to reassess much of their life with Tom, thinking about these snatched conversations and rows that he appears to have interpreted in ways that they didn't interpret.
He's still in my life. He's the ghost in the room. He's a lot of my life is finding out about cults on the internet, on Twitter. That's my preoccupation, trying to understand. I'm trying to share information about cults, because this is just one. To parents, I'd say, if you notice your child's behaviour changing, child of any age, anyone that you care for, if you notice their behaviour's changing, they're cutting themselves off from people that used to be their friends, try and talk to them, find out exactly what they're involved in, find out as much about that as you can. It may be some religion they got caught up in, it may be a gang, it could be drugs, but it could be a cult.